This story was sent in by a man named Tyler. He said that even years later, he still refuses to camp anywhere near a river. Back when Tyler was 23, he and two friends decided to spend a weekend camping deep in a national forest. It was late autumn. The tourist season was mostly over, and they wanted to enjoy the woods without crowds. The drive took nearly 4 hours. As they got farther from civilization, cell service disappeared. The roads became narrower, and the forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. By the time they reached the trailhead, the sun was already beginning to sink behind the trees. "Let's hurry," Tyler's friend Matt said. "I'd rather have the tents set up before dark." The campsite they had chosen was beside a shallow river. According to online reviews, it was one of the most beautiful spots in the area. The hike took about 40 minutes. When they finally arrived, Tyler understood why people loved the location. The river cut through the forest like a silver ribbon. Tall pine trees surrounded the clearing. The only sound were moving water and wind brushing through the branches overhead. It felt peaceful, at least at first. The three friends spent the evening cooking food over a fire and joking around. As darkness settled over the woods, the atmosphere changed. The forest suddenly felt much larger. The trees beyond the firelight became solid walls of darkness. Tyler remembered staring into the woods and feeling as though something could be standing out there, watching them without ever being seen. Around midnight, Matt pointed across the river. "Do you guys see that?" Tyler looked up. At first he thought it was a reflection. Then he realized it wasn't. A small orange light flickered through the trees on the opposite side of the river. It looked like a campfire. "Guess we're not alone," Tyler said. The fire seemed to be about 200 yards away, far enough that they couldn't see any people around it. Just a glow. The three of them stayed up another hour before eventually heading to their tents. Tyler slept alone. Sometime during the night, he woke suddenly. At first, he wasn't sure why. The tent was completely dark. Everything was silent. Then he heard it. A whistle. A single sharp whistle somewhere outside. Tyler froze. A few seconds later, another whistle echoed through the forest. Then another. The sound seemed distant, almost like someone was trying to communicate with somebody else. Tyler checked his phone. 3:17 a.m. He listened for several minutes. Eventually the whistle stopped. The silence returned. Tyler convinced himself it was probably another camper and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning, he mentioned it to his friends. Matt immediately looked uncomfortable. "You heard it too?" he asked. Tyler nodded. "Yeah." Matt stared toward the woods. "I heard footsteps outside my tent right after the whistles." Tyler laughed nervously. "Probably an animal." "Maybe," but Matt didn't sound convinced. The day passed normally. They explored trails, took photos, and returned to camp shortly before sunset. Once again, they noticed a fire across the river. The exact same spot. The exact same orange glow. Still too far away to see who was sitting around it. Tyler found that strange. During their entire hike, they hadn't encountered a single person. Yet somebody was apparently camping directly across from them. That night, they sat around their own fire discussing it. "We should go introduce ourselves tomorrow," Tyler suggested. "Maybe," Matt replied. His friend Jordan shook his head. "No thanks." "Why?" Jordan stared across the river. "I don't know." "What?" "I've got a bad feeling about it." The others laughed, but Jordan wasn't smiling. Eventually they went to sleep. Tyler woke again sometime during the night. This time it wasn't a whistle. It was a voice, a faint voice. At first he couldn't make out what it was saying. He listened carefully. The voice sounded distant, almost like somebody was standing outside the tent whispering. Tyler's heart started racing. He sat up. The whispering continued. Then another voice joined it. Then another. Several voices, all speaking softly. Tyler grabbed a flashlight. The moment he switched it on, the whispering stopped. Instantly, the silence that followed felt unnatural, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Tyler unzipped the tent slightly and looked outside. Nothing. The campsite was empty. The fire had burned out hours ago. The river reflected pale moonlight. Everything appeared normal. Yet something felt wrong. Very wrong. He stayed awake until sunrise. The next morning, he told his friends. Both of them had heard voices too. Nobody laughed this time. By afternoon, they agreed to leave a day early. None of them felt comfortable staying another night. Before packing up, Tyler decided he wanted answers. He pointed toward the opposite side of the river. "I'm going over there." Matt immediately objected. "Why?" "To see who's camping there." Jordan looked uneasy. "Forget it." But Tyler had already started walking. The river was shallow enough to cross. Cold water soaked through his boots as he made his way to the other side. His friends reluctantly followed. The farther they walked, the quieter everything became. Even the birds seemed absent. The glow they had seen at night had appeared to come from deep among the trees. After several minutes, they found a spot and stopped. There was no campsite, no tents, no chairs, no coolers, nothing, just an empty clearing. Tyler looked around in confusion. "This has to be the place." Matt nodded slowly. "It is." The ground contained a circle of blackened stones, evidence of an old fire pit, but it clearly hadn't been used recently. Grass and weeds had grown between the rocks. Jordan suddenly pointed toward the dirt. "What is that?" The three men stepped closer. Footprints. Dozens of footprints. Human footprints. They circled the old fire pit repeatedly, as if people had been walking around it, over and over again. But the strange part wasn't the footprints. It was their condition. They looked old. Weeks old. Maybe older. Certainly not fresh. Tyler felt a chill run through his body. If nobody was here, he never finished the sentence, because at that exact moment, a whistle echoed through the trees. The same whistle they had heard during the night. All three men froze. Another whistle answered from somewhere farther away. Then another. Then another. The sounds moved through the forest around them. Not close enough to identify. Not far enough to ignore. Jordan immediately turned around. "We're leaving." Nobody argued. They hurried back across the river, packed their equipment, and left. As they drove away, Tyler glanced into the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, he thought he saw somebody standing among the trees near the river, watching them. A tall figure, perfectly still, but by the time he looked again, it was gone. Years later, Tyler returned to that forest with his wife. He was curious whether anything had changed. When he reached the ranger station, he mentioned the strange campsite. The ranger listened quietly, then asked a question. "Did you hear whistles?" Tyler immediately felt his stomach drop. The ranger nodded before Tyler could answer. "You aren't the first." According to him, multiple campers had reported hearing whistles near that section of forest over the years. Many also reported seeing campfires across the river. Campfires that disappeared whenever anyone tried to investigate, and no explanation had ever been found. And to this day, Tyler still doesn't know who or what was making those sounds in the woods. This next story comes from a man named Eric. At the time, Eric was 27 years old and had been camping for most of his life. He loved being outdoors. Unlike many people, he actually enjoyed being completely alone in the wilderness. He said it helped him clear his mind. A few years ago, he planned a 3-day solo camping trip in a remote section of forest several hours away from the nearest town. The area was known for its hiking trails and beautiful scenery, but it was also known for being isolated. Very isolated. The nearest ranger station was over 20 miles away. There was almost no cell service. And during the week, very few people visited. That was exactly why Eric chose it. The first day went perfectly. The weather was cool. The trails were empty. The forest felt peaceful. He found a small clearing near the edge of a hill and set up camp. The location overlooked miles of trees stretching toward the horizon. As sunset approached, he cooked dinner over a portable stove and watched darkness slowly consume the landscape. Everything felt normal, until around midnight. Eric was lying inside his tent reading when he heard something unusual. A zipper. At first, he thought it was his imagination. Then he heard again, the unmistakable sound of a tent zipper opening and closing. He immediately sat up. The sound wasn't coming from his tent. It was somewhere outside, maybe 50 yards away. His first thought was simple. Another camper. But that didn't make sense. He hadn't seen anybody all day. Still, he wasn't concerned. Eventually, he fell asleep. The next morning, he decided to explore the surrounding area. While hiking, he searched for signs of another campsite. A tent, a fire pit, anything. He found nothing. The forest appeared completely empty. By evening, he returned to camp. As darkness settled over the woods, he noticed something strange. Far through the trees, he could see a small light. A flashlight. The beam moved slowly between the trunks before disappearing. Eric assumed it belonged to another hiker. Yet something about it felt odd. Most campers would have introduced themselves, especially in such a remote area, but whoever was remained hidden. That night, the zipper sound returned. This time it was closer, much closer. Eric checked his watch. 2:11 a.m. The zipper opened, closed, open again, then silence. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The cold night air hit him immediately. The forest was dark and still. He slowly scanned the area. Nothing. No tents. No lights. No people. Just trees. Feeling uneasy, he returned inside and forced himself to sleep. The following morning, he discovered footprints. Human footprints. They surrounded his campsite. The prints circled his tent several times, as if somebody had walked around it repeatedly during the night. Eric stared at them in disbelief. The ground had been soft from recent rain, making the prints easy to see. Whoever left them had come extremely close. Close enough to touch the tent walls. Eric considered leaving, but curiosity got the better of him. He wanted answers. That evening, he decided to stay awake. Around midnight, he turned off his lantern and sat silently inside his tent, listening, waiting. Hours passed. Nothing happened. Then, shortly after 2 a.m., he heard it again. The zipper, closer than ever. This time he knew exactly where it was coming from. Somewhere directly behind his campsite. Eric slowly reached for his flashlight. The sound continued. Open, close, open, close, as if somebody were repeatedly entering and exiting a tent. His heart pounded. Finally, he stepped outside. The noise stopped instantly. The forest stood silent. Then he saw something. About 70 yards away, between the trees, a tent. A dark-colored tent. Eric froze. He was certain it hadn't been there before. The moonlight barely illuminated it, but there was no mistake. A tent stood among the trees. He stared for several seconds. Then he started walking toward it. The closer he got, the more nervous he became. The tent appeared old, weathered, almost abandoned. No light came from inside. No sounds. No movement. When Eric finally reached it, he called out, "Hello." No response. Anybody there? Nothing. He shined his flashlight at the entrance. The zipper was partially open, just enough to reveal darkness inside. Eric felt a terrible sense of dread. Every instinct told him to leave. Instead, he stepped closer. Then he looked inside. The tent was empty. Completely empty. No sleeping bug. No bakbak. No food. Nothing. Just bare ground. Eric backed away immediately. Something about it felt wrong. Very wrong. He returned to his own campsite and stayed awake until sunrise. The moment daylight arrived, he walked back to the location. The tent was gone. Gone. There was no sign it had ever existed. No footprints. No floating grass. Nothing. Eric stood there for nearly 10 minutes, trying to understand what he was seeing. Or rather, what he wasn't seeing. Had he imagined it? No. He knew what he saw. That night became his final night in the forest. He packed his gear and left early the next morning. Before driving home, he stopped at a small store near the forest entrance. While chatting with the elderly owner, he casually mentioned the strange tent. The man's expression immediately changed. "You saw it too?" Eric felt a chill. "What do you mean?" The owner hesitated before speaking. "People have reported seeing that tent for years." Eric laughed nervously. "What tent?" "The one that appears at night." The owner claimed multiple hikers had described the same thing. A lonely tent appearing deep in the woods. Always at night. Always empty. And always gone by morning. Nobody had ever discovered who owned it, or where it came from. Eric drove home that day with more questions than answers. Years later, he still remembers one final detail. The zipper. The sound that first caught his attention. Because when he thought back on it, he realized something. The zipper noise had continued for several minutes before he found the tent. Far longer than it should have taken someone to enter or exit. Almost as if something had been opening and closing the entrance over and over again, waiting for him to come looking. And if that tent really was empty, then what exactly had been making that sound in the darkness? Our final story comes from a woman named Sarah. Sarah and her younger brother, Dylan, had always enjoyed camping together. A few years ago, they decided to spend a weekend in a heavily wooded area several hours from home. The forest wasn't famous. It wasn't a national park. It was simply a large stretch of wilderness that very few people visited. That was exactly why they chose it. The first day was uneventful. They hiked several miles into the woods and found a quiet clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. The location felt isolated, almost too isolated. As the sun disappeared, the forest became incredibly dark. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds. Without their campfire, they would barely have been able to see a few feet ahead. Around 10 p.m., they retreated to their tents. Sarah slept in one tent while Dylan slept in another nearby. Everything seemed normal until she heard her brother's voice. "Sarah." The voice came from outside. Sarah opened her eyes. The tent was dark. "Yeah," she answered. No response. She assumed Dylan had already gone back to sleep. A few minutes later, she heard it again. "Sarah." This time the voice sounded farther away, almost as if Dylan was standing somewhere deeper in the woods. Sarah sat upright. "Dylan." Silence. A strange feeling settled into her stomach. She checked her phone. 11:48 p.m. After several minutes, she eventually relaxed and drifted back to sleep. Then something woke her again. A voice. The same voice. "Sarah, come here." Her eyes snapped open. The words were unmistakable. It sounded exactly like Dylan, but something felt wrong. The tone was strange. Flat. Almost emotionless. "Sarah, come here." The voice echoed from beyond the campsite, deeper among the trees. Sarah immediately grabbed her flashlight. Instead of going outside, she called Dylan's phone. He answered after 3 rings. His voice sounded sleepy. "Hello." Sarah felt immediate relief. "Dylan, where are you?" "What do you mean? Are you outside?" "No, I'm in my tent." Sarah froze. If Dylan was inside his tent, then who had been calling her name? She quickly explained everything. For a few moments, neither spoke. Finally, Dylan said something that made Sarah's skin crawl. "I heard it too." "What?" "About 20 minutes ago." Sarah felt her heart racing. "You heard your own voice?" "Yeah." He sounded genuinely frightened. "I thought you were messing with me." Neither of them slept much after that. The following day, they tried convincing themselves there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe another camper. Maybe echoes. Maybe somebody playing a prank. Yet neither explanation felt convincing. They hadn't seen a single person in the area. Not one. As evening approached, both agreed they would leave the next morning. One more night. Then they were gone. After sunset, they stayed close to the fire. The forest around them felt different now. Hostile. Every sound seemed amplified. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Around midnight, they finally headed to their tents. Sarah had barely fallen asleep when she heard movement outside. Slow footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound circled her tent. Very slowly. She reached for her flashlight. The footsteps stopped. Then came a voice. Right outside the tent. "Dylan." It was her own voice. Sarah nearly screamed. The imitation wasn't perfect, but it was close enough. Close enough to recognize. "Dylan." The voice repeated. Then silence. Sarah grabbed her phone. Her hand shook as she dialed her brother. He answered immediately. Before she could speak, he whispered, "Did you hear it?" Sarah felt cold all over. "Yes." There was a long pause. Then Dylan spoke again. "I just heard your voice outside my tent." Neither of them moved. Neither dared leave their tents. The forest remained silent for several minutes. Then another voice echoed. Then another voice echoed through the darkness, a different voice. This time it sounded exactly like Dylan. "Sarah." The voice drifted through the trees. "Sarah, help me." Sarah knew it wasn't him that he couldn't be. Yet hearing it still sent terror through her body. The voice sounded scared, desperate, human. For nearly an hour, the voices continued. Sometimes her own, sometimes Dylan's, calling for different directions. Always from somewhere beyond the campfire's reach. Then suddenly, everything stopped. The silence felt even worse. Morning couldn't come fast enough. At sunrise, they packed their equipment without speaking much. Neither wanted to remain there another minute. As they prepared to leave, Sarah noticed something near the edge of the clearing. Footprints. Large footprints that human-shaped, but oddly stretched. The impressions appeared deeper than normal. If whoever made them was unusually heavy. The tracks disappeared into the woods. Dylan noticed them too. Neither followed. They simply left. A few weeks later, Sarah mentioned the experience to an older relative who had spent years hunting in remote forests. The man listened carefully, then asked a question. "Did the voices ever ask you to leave your tent?" Sarah nodded. The man's expression became serious. "Good thing you didn't." Why? The older man stared quietly for several seconds. Then he answered, "Because whatever calls you into the woods at night usually doesn't want you to come back." Sarah laughed nervously at the time. But years later, she still thinks about that answer, because one detail continues to bother her. When she reviewed the audio she had recorded on her phone that night, the voices were clearly audible, both her voice and Dylan's, calling from somewhere in the forest. Yet according to the recording's timestamp, those voices were captured while both of them were on the phone with each other inside their tents. Meaning neither voice should have been out there. And to this day, neither of them knows who or what was waiting beyond the trees.